Please welcome David Marks, I Survived the Soviet Union.
Откройте чемодан. Что вы вывозите из страны? Mr. Contest Chair, I know you don't need a translation, but that was a customs officer, and it was my last memory before I escaped from the Soviet Union. And he was telling me to open my suitcase and what was I trying to smuggle out of the country. The list of things that were forbidden to be taken out of the Soviet Union was quite extensive actually, and included samovars, gold bars and girlfriends. I say escaped because the Soviet Union of those times, we're talking about the mid-1970s, really was a vast prison camp. The customs officer I was talking about was actually on the train at Brest station on the Polish border, and to this day it makes me shudder to think of the minefields and the dog patrols and the machine gun towers that we could see when we looked out of the carriage window. The Soviet Union at that time, what else was going on? The writer Solzhenitsyn was at that time expelled from the country. Andrei Sakharov, the nuclear physicist, was exiled from Moscow and had to go and live in Gorky. And I personally learnt how a government can destroy life by limiting and restricting all of the options for travel and for work and for self-expression. Someone I can tell you about is a good friend of mine at the time, called Yaroslav, and he was a very good example of this, where he was very talented. He studied Finnish and spoke fluent Finnish, which is a great achievement for anybody. But he was a marked man. He'd made his political opinions known in the wrong place and the wrong way, and he was expelled from the Young Communist for a start. He was barred from the Communist Party, and he could only work when and where the KGB allowed. There was no way out for him. Now, can you imagine that? Has anyone been in a situation like that? If you were, what could you do? It was a scary place even for me as a privileged foreigner. We assumed that there were microphones everywhere. We'd actually go out in the corridor and have our conversations. We knew there were spies everywhere because the country was built on a nationwide network of informers. But I survived. I escaped. And I'm here to tell the tale. And actually, in common with many people who were born in the Soviet Union and grew up there, and I'm sure there are a few in the audience today, not only did I survive, but I thrived. And I came back to the UK after my 3 years as a student and working with valuables far more important than samovars and gold bars. I'll tell you about them. The first one was a deep understanding and appreciation of freedom. The freedom to go wherever I like in the world. The freedom to do and to say whatever I feel like, as long as it doesn't harm other people. And the freedom to live my own life using my own thoughts and my own resources. It's somewhat like Nelson Mandela wrote sometime later in his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, that it's only when you've been deprived of freedom that you really appreciate how valuable it is. And the second treasure that I brought out with me was a fundamental business education. You might think that's a bit ironic because here we were in Moscow, the capital of anti-capitalism. The first job I got when I got back to the UK was in sales. Excellent sales training, but what I learned in Moscow was so much more valuable. I learned how to understand sales and business from a customer point of view. Salespeople very often complain and say, oh, it's so difficult to sell. But living in Russia, it was difficult to buy. Can you imagine that? And many in the audience will recognise this situation. It's Christmas Eve. Shops are just about to close and you still haven't bought that special present, that perfect present for that special person. Can you get someone to sell to you? Is it easy to buy? And there we were, many of us anyway, in Moscow, walking around with buckets of rubles. The situation where if you saw a queue on the street, you jump in the queue and you'd say, "Что дают?" What's on sale? Before, anyway, you'd buy it. It didn't matter because you had the money and nothing to buy. You're probably wondering what happened to Yaroslav. The last time I saw him before the Berlin Wall came down, he was a multi-millionaire and he got rich by supplying customer demand for clothes, for music, for hi-fi gear. And the third valuable treasure that I brought back with me, I told you girlfriends were forbidden, but as long as you got the paperwork right, you were allowed to bring your wife. So I brought my wife back and we've lived together happily in the UK for about 40 years. I think she's going to get to like it eventually. So there you go. If you're ever offered an opportunity to go somewhere that you feel could be a bit scary and it might be a bit uncomfortable, here's an idea. Take the chance. Maybe like me, you'll strike it rich. I survived, I thrived. I left Moscow and I've been back many, many times willingly.